a Saturday, and no one was there except the father and his two sons. Over the front door was a sign, a leather sign, that said, Lewis and Hitchcock since 1915. My father, as he unlocked the door, said, "Here is where I help build and repair pipe organs. This is the largest and oldest pipe organ company in the Mid-Atlantic area. When I'm not doing repair work in the churches, this is where I spend my days." Then he directed our attention to a piece of woodwork. He said, "I've been working on this for the past several months. This will be the front of an organ. It's called a facade. And the facade pipes over there will fill these open spaces." My father was working on the trim pieces on the front of an organ. Not quite as majestic as this one, I might say, but it was the decorative trim work is what he was working on. And the structure was about 30 feet tall, and it was exquisite. I was dumbfounded. I asked him, how did you get started at Lewis and Hitchcock? He said, several years ago, I was sitting in a barber shop, and one of the owners of Hitchcock walked in and said, "Is anybody here to bring your hands?" I said, "I raised mine, and I came here, and I've been here ever since." It was 8 years ago. It was beginning to sink in. My father builds pipe organs for churches. Unbelievable. I moved my hand along the facade. I wanted to touch his handiwork. For the first time in my life, I was in awe of my father and bursting with pride. The next day, we drove to Annapolis. As far as the eye could see, there was blue water with hundreds of white sailboats glistening in the sun. During lunch, my brother and I got down to the purpose of our visit. We explained to my father that when we lived in Washington as young boys, the family myth was, Mommy is good, Mommy was good, and Daddy was bad. And we told him we don't buy that anymore. As grown men, we could see the remarkable man he'd become, and that we could only stand in awe and respect him for the many obstacles he had overcome in the course of his life. In short, we told him we were proud to be his sons. Several months later, my dad traveled to Georgia. There he met our wives, and for the first time held in his arms his two grandsons. And sadly, 7 years later, he died of lung cancer. My brother, Bill, and I still remind each other how grateful we are that we made that trip to Washington. We're glad that we stepped beyond our comfort zone to reconcile with our Father. And it has made all the difference. I shudder to think that the relationship with my dad could have remained for the rest of my life as a frayed, loose end, just dangling there, fraught with guilt and unanswered questions. What a needless tragedy that would have been. But no, thanks to my clinical supervisor, God brought about a sweet reconciliation. And that's what Paul was talking about when he said God reconciled us to himself and has given us the ministry of reconciliation, the ministry of bringing people back together. Often a third party is needed to bring back people who are involved in one another. Third party. When I was serving my first church in the Americas, I know this is hard for you to understand, but I said something unkind about one of the members of that congregation. When he started avoiding me, I knew immediately what the issue was. But frankly, I felt stuck. I didn't know how to approach him. I didn't know what to say. I was embarrassed. What I said was accurate, but woefully inappropriate and certainly unkind. Fortunately, during that time, the church had scheduled a lay witness mission, and the event had been prayed for daily in advance. And during the weekend mission, I got a call to go to church. The leader of the mission team met me at the door. He explained, there was a member of my church seated in one of the Sunday school rooms who needed to work things out with this minister. I said, by all means. In a matter of minutes, I had apologized and asked my member to forgive me. It just came tumbling out. And the same for him. And with tears in our eyes, we hugged, and it was over. As I was driving home, the heaviness that I had been carrying for weeks began to lift. I felt my spirit returning. This disruptive relationship had tied me in knots for weeks, and I was grateful that the team leader had brought us together and resolved that. There's an old saying that time heals everything. No, it doesn't. The only way to resolve conflict and discord is to face it straight up and deal with it. I think it's instructive to observe that in both of these stories this morning about reconciliation, the action was initiated by way of a suggestion. A suggestion. My supervisor suggested that I make the trip to Washington. And the mission leader probably said something like this: let's get your minister here and see if we can work this out. Suggestion. Listen, never underestimate the power of a suggestion. Sometimes it can move a mountain. When I was single and growing weary of it, my roommate in Philadelphia one day suggested that I go to Atlanta and ask Carol Holly out for a date. I took his advice, and that suggestion was a life changer and a blessing ever since. Sometimes a well-placed suggestion is all that's needed to get the ball rolling toward a new beginning somewhere. But when it's you, when you are the one who is at odds with someone, it becomes a little more challenging. That's when it's helpful to hear what Paul said to a conflicted church in Corinth. God reconciled himself to us through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. You see, God took the initiative to bring about reconciliation. In the same way, you and I need to take the initiative when we find ourselves in a relationship that is strained or broken. The ministry of bringing people back together has been given to all of us, all who call themselves Christian. That shouldn't surprise us, because our Lord has placed the highest of priorities on right relationships, on living in peace and harmony, creating a space where love can thrive. I've always aspired to be both tough-minded and tender-hearted. It strikes me as the Christian way to be. Make love your own. Make love your aim, says St. Paul. And doesn't love demand the utmost in clear thinking? You can't think straight with a heart filled with hatred. If your heart is a stone, you can't have decent thoughts about people. It's no wonder that Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, lifted up the importance of living in harmony, free from discord and rancor. He said, therefore, if you bring your offering to the altar, and there remember that your brother and sister has something against you, leave your offering before the altar and go your way. First, be reconciled with your brother or sister, then come offer your gift. Listen, when you get all crossed up with someone, it has spiritual implications. Hear these words from 1 Peter. Husbands must give honor to your wives. If you don't treat her as you should, your prayers will not be heard. When you mistreat someone or hold a grudge, it affects your relationship with God. That's why St. Paul encourages the church in Rome with these words. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Make no mistake about it. These days, we live in a nation where violence is escalating beyond belief. With 15 mass shootings in the last 8 years, the worst last Sunday in Orlando. And almost daily, we hear of violence erupting in our schools, on our highways, and in the workplace. In such a time as this, it's up to us to be the peacemakers. This is precisely what Paul is saying. It's up to us to go the second mile, to do what we can to bring harmony, to work at peacemaking wherever and whenever we can. When we do this, Paul says we become ambassadors for Christ. Christ making his appeal through us, which is no small thing. So I invite you to be a reconciler this morning, to become